All right. So you're thinking about selling on Amazon in Australia, but you're just not 100% sure how to do that or if it's even the right thing for your business. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of selling on Amazon in Australia. And if you decide that the pros definitely work out for you to add on some additional sales for your business, then we're going to walk you through step by step how to do that here in this video. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of Australia. So I would say some of the pros are the fact it's an English speaking marketplace. And if you have products that already sell on Amazon in the US, it can be a good way to just add on a little additional revenue stream in Australia. And, there's really not as much setup with Amazon Australia as there is in Europe or even Canada, because initially you don't have to register with the government, is what I have found. Now, everything I'm saying in here, please take with a grain of salt and do your own research. I'm not here to provide tax advice, just sharing you kind of my own meandering experience and some of the research I have found and help point you in the right direction as you make your research. Now, to talk a little bit about some of the additional pros are, I tend to find my BSRs, my bestseller ranking in Australia on almost every product is like through the roof better. Like I'll have products that maybe have 100,000 bestseller ranking in the US. Like they're just not really getting great sales in the US, like just for whatever reason. Maybe it's just a lot of competition or it's just a variation that's just not working out very well. And the BSR in the US might be, 100,000 or something like that. And in Australia, it might be like 6,500 or something, like just crazy. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but it's sometimes it's not even that far off. And sometimes I've had products that have, really good BSRs because, maybe they had 3 sales that month. Like it's pretty slow. And that gets into the cons. It's of the English speaking marketplaces, it's definitely one of the slower ones. So if you're looking for a beginner marketplace, I would go with Canada first, relative to the amount of time and effort you'll put into it. I think the results you'll get in Canada, you'll be much happier with. And then I would go to the UK. And then beyond that, if you're starting to look into it, where do I go next? Australia might be your next spot. And one of the reasons I also like Australia is because, again, it's simple to get up and running. It's still relatively new, so it's growing, but that's still also a con, is that as of right now, eBay, as I've talked with folks from Australia, eBay is still the thing. And so maybe 15 years ago here in the US, 10, 15 years ago, Amazon and eBay were kind of neck and neck, or even eBay was maybe the thing, and then Amazon overtook them. Well, over in Australia, eBay is still by far has the dominant foothold because Amazon is relatively new in Australia. And so I want to say there was some statistic I had heard that they rolled it out about 3 years ago as I record this video, putting a marketplace in Australia with fulfillment centers and whatnot. And they did that because they were getting maybe 500,000 pounds or dollars of sales on amazon.co.uk from Australian customers. So like, well, maybe there's market. And so there is market there. The population is roughly half the size of Canada, but it's not half the sales. I tend to see anywhere between maybe 10 and 20% of my Canadian sales I see in Australia, and Canada is about 20% of my US sales. And so if you take that down, it starts getting smaller and smaller. So it's not huge numbers. And it's also another con is it can be hard to figure out, like, will your product succeed or what is even really the sales potential? So if you're looking in Canada or the European Union or UK, like any country in either Europe or North America, most of the tools that you use for demand generation, like maybe Jungle Scout or Helium 10, those will usually work in those marketplaces. Whereas in Australia, because you're not in Europe or under the umbrella of North America, so you're kind of flying blind. Now, the good news is all your competition over there is too. And so if you have expanded into Canada and you've expanded into the UK and gone into the European Union, I would say maybe start looking into Australia at this time. And so the reason I say that is because it can still be another way to grow. And you might compare Australia to trying to set up, oh, I don't know, an Etsy store or eBay, and you might still end up better with Amazon Australia. So when you start looking into what are your options and you're running out of some of the low hanging fruit like Canada and UK, um, you don't have to translate anything over here. So it could be something to get started. So one of the things to note is that, generally speaking, I say, when you're going into other marketplaces, it's kind of a 3-step process. When you really break it down, it's you register, you set up, and then you manage it. And so the setup part, the register part is pretty simple. So just to show you something here real quick. So this is the Australian government's website registering for GST. I had even called them just because I wanted to make sure I was doing it right when I was setting up. And the way they've got it here is that your first $75,000 in sales, and that's Australian dollars, which are actually, and this goes to show with pricing, it's not quite the same as a US dollar. And so it used to be about 1.4 Australian dollars was a US dollar, but now it's down to 1.29. I mean, that's not a huge swing, but that's actually favorable when you're bringing money into the United States. As opposed to 1.4, because it takes less Australian dollars to equal a US dollar. So when you're bringing it into the US dollar, into the US, that's the direction you want it to be, which is a good thing. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, again, you only need to register once you've had 75,000 Australian dollars, which again, it's not quite the same as a US dollar. But I haven't even come close to it. And so, you can test the water, so to speak, and you can start with very small quantities. Now, on that same note, if we come back over here, we talk a little bit more about, you don't have to register. So that is a nice thing. There's no registration, at least with the government. And then down the road, hopefully you grow into it that you do need to register, but initially you don't have to worry about that. Next, you want to go into Seller Central and add Australia as a marketplace. And so oftentimes you have to get approved for it, but it's, they want you to do it. So it's not like you have to put in like a long dissertation, but basically you just register by going, you could go in Seller Central inventory to sell globally. So if you can imagine, there's the inventory menu and then sell globally. You might miss it on your way down to like add a product or manage inventory, that same little drop down. You click that, basically there's going to be some tabs and you want to pick the tab for Pacific, Australia, depending on how it's worded on your screen. And then you want to add the Australian marketplace. And then when you're ready, you can start adding your listings. Now there, you could probably just take the price in the US and multiply it times 1.4. Now it's showing there in the other screen, it was 1 to 1.29 so 1 US dollar is 1.29 Australian dollars. So if you said 1 to 1.4, you're giving yourself a little bit of a buffer, because if it, let's say, goes the other way and goes to 1.5 Australian dollars to 1 US dollar, then that's going the opposite direction, where it's now more expensive to bring goods back home. So that's why I like to sometimes give myself a little bit of a buffer. And to be honest, people have been paying along that exchange rate for a while. So you can always look at the competition. It's one of those things you never really know until you get in the market and test it out. But I would say if you're just looking for a kind of a rule of thumb, you could take your price in the US times 1.4 and maybe massage the number, because, if you do everything in like 0.99 is how it ends, you just maybe want to round up to the next 0.99 or whatever the case is. Then you want to send in your inventory. Now, one thing to know is whenever you're sending anything to Amazon, you're going to, always have, if you're sending FBA anyway to a fulfillment center, you're always going to have an FBA label. Now, if you're doing parcels into Amazon in the US and they give you a shipping label, or they have partnered carriers, or whatever the case is, you probably will see, you get like Amazon's helping you figure out the cost there. And so you're on your own whenever you're going over a border. And so if you maybe have a prep center that you're using in Australia to receive the product, and maybe add labels or whatever the case is, because your labels most likely will be different than they are in other marketplaces. So just pay close attention to that. But when you do send in your inventory, you want to be responsible for figuring out or just know that you should be responsible. You will be responsible, I should say. You will be responsible for the cost of the shipment. And so you're going to have to find your own shipping. So sometimes that can make it a little bit more expensive. So like I was saying before, if you give yourself a little bit of a buffer when you're figuring out pricing, it'll tend to work out in your favor. And my understanding is Australia is a relatively expensive country to live in. So people are probably used to a little bit higher prices than they might be in the US as well. And so, you don't want to gouge people, but relative to the market, you could recoup some of that additional cost is what I'm saying. So once you send it in, you'll send in the inventory. And once Amazon has checked it, checked in, I got the hiccups there, has checked it in, then you're off to the races. And, hopefully you get to that point of the 75,000 where you do have to register. And at that point you can call the Australian government, but you can at least get started there. And again, so if it makes sense because, you've kind of exhausted your other international resources and you're comparing, is Amazon Australia going to beat out maybe eBay, or spending more time on, another wish.com or something like that, Australia is probably going to do better off for you. So hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you could, give it a little thumbs up. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section down below. Now, if you're interested in growing your own international empire selling on Amazon, you can always go to internationalchecklist.com. And I've got a checklist which will walk you through the steps on that pretty much is a repeatable process that you can work in to your business throughout all marketplaces. And so again, internationalchecklist.com, and then it'll walk you through step-by-step how to grow your own international empire on Amazon, whether it's in Australia or in another marketplace. I wish you the best in your e-commerce journey. Take care.